document service. Today's webinar is conducted by the incredible Rebecca Hicks, a Texas construction lien law expert. Today's webinar topic is Lien and Bond Claim Masterclass, everything they don't tell you but should. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the fabulous Rebecca Hicks.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here today. As Jesse said, Rebecca Hicks with Hicks Law Group. I am board certified in construction law, and I have been doing lien and bond claim work for, I think, 24 years, somewhere around there now. So I am the nerd that thinks that lien and bond claims are super interesting. So today we're going to talk about some of the things that, I really want you guys to know that I don't think are commonly known about lien and bond claims in Texas. Let me give you my caveat. Texas lien and bond claim law is some of the most complicated in the country. We've tried to get it simplified. We try to push that through the Texas legislature for years and years. Now that's happened, hasn't gotten through. So we are still dealing with some of the most complex mechanics lien and bond claim laws in the country. So are we going to be able to cover every nuance of that in our class together today? No. Are you going to leave here with some good information that you can act on so that hopefully you know what you need to do to protect your lien and bond claim rights, or at least you know the deadlines so that you know to start asking those questions in time? That's my goal for this session today. If y'all have questions, just ask. I think they want you to put them in the chat. They'll go ahead and communicate the questions to me so that I can answer them. I would certainly prefer to answer your questions when we're talking about that topic during the webinar. So feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. So here are really the questions. They're really, I consider, three basic questions you have to know the answer to, or there's no way in the world you can perfect your lien or bond claim rights. These are those questions. If you don't know the answer to these questions, there's nothing you can do. These types of claims all have different rules and different deadlines. Unless you know the answers to these questions, you cannot begin to protect your lien and bond claim rights. So step one, you have to get good project information, and we're going to cover some basics on that. Step two, you got to know what your deadline is. And step three, how do you perfect the claim once you know what? So how do you, step one, project information. This is the most important step in my world, because if you don't know this, you can't even hire someone to help you. SunRay can't help you if you don't know the basics about your project. So what am I talking about? What type of project it is and who contracted with whom on the project is going to impact the timing of your notices. What are your deadlines? You can't even figure out your deadlines unless you know the project information. And then you've got to know the steps. The steps to perfect your claim are also going to depend on where you sit in that construction chain. So again, the project information. So here's the three big questions that I need you to really focus on when you're gathering project information. What kind of project is it? And what do I mean by that? I mean, who owns it? Is it publicly owned? Is it privately owned? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. What is your position in the construction chain? Who are you contracted with all the way until you get to that owner? And when I say owner, that's who owns the dirt, whose name's on the deed. And is there a payment bond? Those are your three key questions you've got to know the answers to. And we're going to touch on each of those a little bit. So what kind of project is it? These are the four types of projects that it can be in Texas. It can be a private works project. That means it's privately owned. It can be a state or local public works. That means maybe it's TxDOT, maybe it's City of Dallas, maybe it's City of Fort Worth, maybe it's City of Houston, maybe it's the county. Those are all state or local public works projects. It could be a federal project, could be working on an Army base, post office, those types of things, Army Corps of Engineers projects, those types of things are federal works. Or it could be a public-private partnership. Those are basically your four types of projects that you could be working on. You've got to know which is which. So private project is just anything that's owned by a private entity or individuals. So if you see that an LLC owns it, A company, a corp, an Inc. owns it. That's who's on the deed. That's whose name is on the ownership. That's going to be a private project. If it's owned by individuals, that's going to be a private project. So then your rules that are going to apply, the rules we're going to be looking at for how you perfect a claim are going to be governed by Texas Property Code Chapter 53 if it is a private project. The majority of projects that I work on behalf of clients fall into this category. They're privately owned projects, right? So then the Chapter 53 rules apply. What's important about that? That's a job that you're going to file a mechanics lien on. There is not going to be, many of these projects are not going to be bonded. Even if they are bonded, private job that's bonded, you're still going to file a mechanics lien on it. So these projects, if it's privately owned and you find yourself about to send out a bond claim notice and not file a mechanics lien, you will be in trouble. One of the things that, I really want you guys to understand is these sureties are not going to help you. If you know a job is bonded and you've even got a copy of a payment bond on it, if you send a notice letter and it's not the right kind of letter and you haven't sent it to the right parties, or maybe you have sent it late or something like that, the surety is not going to help you perfect your claim. They will just simply wait for your deadline to pass and then deny your claim. That is what will happen. So you have to know which rules you need to follow. And for private projects, it's going to be take Chapter 53 of the Texas Property Code. And it's going to be a lien claim, but there could be a payment bond. And I'll talk with you a little later about how you deal with privately bonded private jobs. So then the next most common form of projects that I see in working with clients is state or local government. So we see a lot of school jobs. That's going to be a state or local government. TxDOT jobs, they're working on a fire station, all of those types of things, anything city related, road work related, unless it's the international highways, then that's going to be state or local government owned jobs. So the rules that apply to these state or local government owned jobs is Texas Government Code Chapter 2253. Those are the rules that apply there. These jobs will always be bonded. You will need to make a bond claim that meets very specific requirements on these jobs. So if you send a regular quote unquote lien notice, you will not be able to perfect a claim. The surety will not tell you that you have the wrong form of notice, but it will be a bond claim. It will not be a lien claim if you are working on any of these state or local government types of jobs. So then our third type of project that it could be a federal public works job. So if you're working on a military base, post office, federal buildings of any kind, that's a separate set of rules. That's the Miller Act and 40 U.S.C. 3131 that governs federal jobs. We don't see these that often, but I do see them maybe once every 6 months or so. I've got clients working on these federal jobs where we have to make one. The important thing to know if you're working on any of these federal projects is these jobs will also be bonded. There will be a payment bond. You will not be filing a lien claim. You will not be sending lien notices, and these deadlines are not as strict. The beautiful thing is if you happen to be doing federal work, making a claim is a lot easier than under Texas state law. So keep that in mind. And really, if you think about it big picture wise, you're thinking about these projects that you're working on. And the whole premise of mechanics lien and bond claim law is they want the money for the value that's being added to property to get into the hands of the folks that are adding that value. So the folks that are actually doing the work. And so for private projects, since it's privately owned, the law says, hey, this subcontractor, this plumber down here has added a lot of value to this land where this apartment complex is being built because they've done $300,000 worth of plumbing work. They should have a claim, a right against the actual property, the dirt, where they added that value. And that is where the mechanics lien comes in. That is what a mechanics lien does. It gives that subcontractor, should you follow all the rules and meet all the deadlines you're supposed to, an interest in the real property. You can actually foreclose your mechanics lien and foreclose on that property. That's the way the law works, because they want to protect that company's right to the value that they've added to that property. But now if you flip the coin and you think about it, well, I'm working on a Texas Department of Transportation job. Well, who owns the highways? At the end of the day, we all do, as long as you've been paying your taxes in Texas, the taxpayers own. And so then the law says, well, we don't want folks to be able to foreclose on these publicly owned properties like highways, because that doesn't sound like a good idea for our society. So that's why those jobs are always bonded. So your claim is against the payment bond instead of the real property. So hopefully that makes sense. And you can think about that when you're gathering that project information. The light bulb needs to come on when you know, oh, this is government owned, that there will be a payment bond and your claim will be a payment bond claim. The last type of project that it could be, and these are becoming more and more common, are public-private partnerships. So that is basically a partnership between a private entity and a public entity. We have several examples of these in the Dallas area where I'm based. We have a park called Clyde Warren Park that was built as a public-private partnership. Our Omni Hotel in downtown was a public-private partnership. And what it is maybe the government owns the dirt, but they give a private entity a long-term lease. The private entity builds, whatever structure is going to be there, and then they make however much money that they make from it, and they're paying the government a lease, right? Something like that. Or tollways are often public-private partnerships, where a private entity does the major capital investments and builds the tollway, but then they're collecting those tolls to pay themselves back. The government's not getting that toll money, if that makes sense. So the important thing, if you happen to be working on a public-private partnership project in Texas, that our legislature has clarified which rules, because the big question was, well, which rules apply? Do the private project rules apply, or do the public project rules apply? Well, our Texas legislature cleared that up several years back, and so public-private partnership jobs will be treated as government jobs. So the 2253 government code rules, where there's a payment bond required, those are going to be the rules that apply to a public-private partnership in Texas. So thanks for clearing that up, Texas legislature. So now, what's our other question that we've got to know the answer to? What's your position in the construction chain? And this is what I mean. When I say construction chain, this is basically kind of a representation of what I mean. We've got to know who contracted with whom. The construction industry is very contract laden, right? You shouldn't be doing work without a written contract or at least a purchase order, right? Right. So somebody, starting with the owner, whoever it is that wants to make the improvement, is going to enter into a contract with the general contractor. And then that contractor is going to hire probably several different subcontractors. And then there can be second tier, third tier, down till we get to where you are in the construction chain. So you've got to ask those questions. Hey, who are you contracted with back until you get to the owner? Now, you all probably know this, that there are many different construction delivery systems now. So this is there's not always going to be just one general contractor or just one original contractor like this graphic I've got on the screen. You can have multiple original contractors. All original or prime contractor means is they're contracted directly with the owner. Let me say that again. What the law means by prime contractor, general contractor, or original contractor is just if that party is contracted directly with the owner. So let's say that you're a plumber and you usually work as a first tier subcontractor through a general contractor, but you've got a project where the owner hired you directly. Does that make you a general contractor? Absolutely. For purposes of mechanics lien and bond claim law, you just became a general contractor for that job. So also, if you see a project where the owner and the general contractor are basically one and the same, they're under common ownership, I should say. What you'll see with a lot of these larger developers is they will create a separate legal entity for their construction arm, right? And they do that because they think it will help protect them from mechanics lien and from bond claims and mechanics liens, because the farther you get down in this construction chain, the harder it is to perfect a claim because there may be more notice required, right? The second tier and below subcontractors have additional notice requirements. So they'll try to protect themselves by having the owner, whoever owns the dirt, be one legal entity, and a quote unquote construction arm be their general contractor, and then they'll contract from there. Well, if you see that situation, Texas law is generally going to combine those two for purposes. If they're under common ownership and control, those two companies will be considered one company for purposes of your notices and lien and bond claims. So just keep that in mind. Then your last question you've got to know the answer to is there a payment bond? Now, we've talked about this. If it is state or local owned, if it's a state or local government job, there will be a payment bond. And you need to get a copy of that payment bond. If it is a federal job, anything that's government owned, there will be a payment bond. Here's the complicated one though. If it is a private project, so a private entity owns the land, right? Or individuals own, there may or may not be a payment bond. And you won't know unless you ask. Any private job can be bonded. And all that means, let me kind of take a step back and make sure we all understand what a payment bond is. What am I talking about? A payment bond is, generally speaking, it's almost like an insurance policy that a general contractor purchases that says, hey, owner, you have hired me to build your apartment complex on your land. I am going to build it for the $10 million as we agreed. But I am going to pay all of the people that I hire as subcontractors or suppliers on this job. And I promise you, owner, that I'm going to pay them. But if for any reason I, as the general contractor, do not pay my subcontractors or suppliers on this job, I am posting this insurance policy. I'm buying this insurance policy through my insurance company that is referred to as the surety. Sureties are just insurance companies. I'm going to buy this payment bond from my surety, from my insurance company, that says that will pay those subcontractors and suppliers if I do not pay them. That's what a payment bond is. So it's an insurance purchase policy purchased by the general contractor to benefit the suppliers and subcontractors below the general contractor if the general contractor does not get them paid. That's what a payment bond is. So for private projects, it can be bonded. The law says there are certain rules in Chapter 53 of the Texas Property Code that says there can be a payment bond on those projects, but they're not required. There's no type of project that is required to be bonded. So if you do not ask the question, hey, is there a payment bond on this job, you're not going to know. You won't know, and you'll miss that opportunity to make that bond claim. So that's, you definitely want to know the answer to that question. And we're going to touch on subcontractor bonds because that's becoming a little more of a prominent thing now too. We just talked about that. So, and here's the kind of, I want to make sure you don't get confused when you're asking for these payment bonds, because basically what you're going to do is ask the general contractor, can you provide me a copy of the payment bond? Is the job, if it's a private project, the first question is there a payment bond on this job? If their answer to that question is yes, your next question is, can you send me a copy of the payment bond? Because they shouldn't have any problem doing that, because what we just talked about, right? The payment bond is an insurance policy that's for your benefit. You're a beneficiary of this insurance policy. You're entitled to see it. Chapter 53 says you're entitled to see it. I make that point because sometimes we'll get this pushback if you get kind of inexperienced general contractors, or maybe somebody that hasn't worked in that field that long, and you ask the question, hey, can I get a copy of the payment bond? They get real weird or cagey about it, or you might get pushback, and it just doesn't make any sense. The whole reason why that payment bond is there is for your benefit, and you're entitled to see it. So don't listen to the pushback. You're entitled to see that payment bond. Here's what I wanted you, when a project is bonded, a general contractor is generally required to provide two different types of bond. The one is the payment bond that we just talked about, that is for the benefit of subcontractors and suppliers, but they're also generally required to put in, post a payment or a performance bond. That's a totally separate kind of bond. And for your purposes as a subcontractor or someone trying to make a bond claim, you don't care about that performance. What is a performance bond? It is a separate insurance policy purchased by that general contractor that says, hey, Mr. Owner, if I, as general contractor, cannot actually perform your project, I cannot get your apartment complex built for the $10 million that I agreed to, I go out of business or I get terminated, that this bond over here, this insurance policy says this surety is going to step in, hire a replacement contractor, and get your project built. That's what a performance bond is. So you don't care about that for purposes of what we're talking about today. I say that because oftentimes when you ask for a copy of a bond, they will send you both of these bonds. They will send both of them just as the same PDF. Usually they'll email it to us, the same PDF, and you have to make sure you're looking at the top of the bond and looking at the title. And you care about the one that says payment bond, not the one that says performance bond. That's why I'm saying that. So the payment bond that's required by government jobs is this one that's between, that's posted by the general contractor, right? That's the type of bond that the law requires for government jobs. It's also the type of bond where a private project can be bonded. But we also are seeing more and more where when a owner requires a job to be bonded, or it's a government job, these general contractors are pushing that risk level down to usually the first set of subs. And they're requiring those first tier subs to also put up a payment bond. So there can be subcontractor payment bonds. There's nothing in the law that requires a subcontractor to bond a job. That is all just a contract, matter of contract. It is because that general contractor put it in their subcontract that they're requiring their first tier subs to bond the job. So there's nothing in the law that ever requires a subcontractor to bond a job, but a subcontractor can bond any job, and you're never going to know unless you ask the question, is there a subcontractor bond? The larger the job, the more likely it is that the subcontractors might be required to bond the job, is kind of the rule of thumb. And that's the same rule of thumb when we're talking about, is a private project bonded? The larger the job that the private project is, the more likely it is that that private owner has required the general contractor to bond the job. So, for example, if you're working on a big hospital project, most of those, even if it's a privately owned hospital, which many are, they're most likely bonded. There's most likely a payment bond. And so for larger commercial jobs that are privately owned, there very well may be a payment bond, and there very well may be subcontractor payment bonds. So why am I telling you this? Because you ideally want to know about both the general contractor payment bond and the subcontractor payment bond so that you can make a claim from both. The more claims you make, the more likely you are to get paid. One of these sureties is probably going to end up paying you as long as you don't miss a deadline or send the wrong type of notice. So that's why we're saying that. So how do you get the payment bond? Here's just seriously, my staff does this every month when we're doing lien and bond claims. They do this every month. We call it project research, but it's just beating the bushes to try to get the information you need. If it's a government job, you can likely call whomever the contracting agent is on that job, and they will probably, somebody in their office is going to have a copy of the payment bond, and they will probably just email it to you. If they are not willing to just email it to you with an informal like email or phone call, then you may have to do an open records request, a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. Those are so easy to do. Most governmental entities have just a little form you fill out online and make that request and say, hey, I need a copy of this. You tell them the name of the project, tell them your company's name, and you ask for a copy of the payment bond. That's all you need to do. What you need to pay attention to there, though, with the FOIA request is it generally will take them some time to get back to you. So if you're pushing a deadline, you're not going to get it in time. So you would have to do that in advance. I'd say if you can do it at least 2 weeks in advance, you should be good in most situations. And for most governmental entities, they should get back to you within 2 weeks. But, you know, the governments move slow, so think in advance if you're trying to request it through FOIA. On private projects, or well, basically almost any project, we generally will be able to get a copy of the payment bond by just calling the general contractor. The general contractor is the one that bought that payment bond. They're the principal on the payment bond. They bought the insurance policy, right? and they should know that it's for your benefit as a subcontractor or supplier on the job. So most of the time, with a general contractor that's of any kind of size or sophistication, we can just ask them to email us a copy of the payment bond, and they have no problem at all doing that. You can also reach out to the general contractor's bonding agent. A lot of times they'll refer us over to their insurance agent or bonding agent, and the bonding agent then will send us a copy of the payment bond. So that's kind of just practical advice how you're going to be getting that. Another way you can find payment bonds on state, local government jobs particularly is, generally speaking, let's say it's a city of Houston job. The City Council of Houston has to approve the contract with the general contractor. So there's going to be a board meeting, there's going to be board minutes, and they're generally going to have a copy of the contract that they're going to approve attached to those minutes. And the payment bond copy is usually attached to that contract. So a lot of times you can just find these payment bonds online by looking at meeting minutes where the board, let's say the board of directors for the DFW airport or the board for the city of Dallas, they've approved that contract, and you can just find those minutes online and find that payment bond that way. We find a lot of them that way as well. Unfortunately,
if I can interrupt you for just a moment, Rebecca, I do have a question that came through. I think you've already touched on this a little bit, but I just want you to be able to provide a little bit of clarity to this person. It says subcontractors are only required to have a payment bond, not a performance bond.
Well, first of all, a subcontractor is never required to have a payment bond or a performance bond. Can a general contractor require by contract? Can you contract for them to have? There's nothing, I should say, let me take a step back. There's nothing in Texas law that ever says a subcontractor should ever have to provide a payment bond or a performance bond. But can a general contractor by contract require you to do that because the contract says so? Yes, they can. So if you sign a subcontract that says you're going to provide a performance bond, then yeah, you have to provide that. If you sign a subcontract that says you're going to provide a payment bond, then yes, you have to provide that. The only place that requirement is coming from is if you sign a contract that says that. If you don't want to bond the job and you get that 20-page Pico font subcontract form sent to you by the general contractor, you need to mark that part out. Is how you need to deal with it. But that's kind of how it works. It's a product of contract only. Is what it is.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And just a heads up on your time. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. So how you going to project information? The best advice I can give to you is fill out something similar to this, what I call a project information sheet. If you gather your project information up front before you start having a payment problem, before you have to think about even trying to send a payment bond or performance bond or a payment bond claim or a mechanics lien claim, you're going to be much farther ahead of the game. So get your project information up front. And if you all want to send me an email, I'll be happy to send you a copy of this form of a project information sheet, which our clients will use when we're trying to work with them on these claims. How do you provide, this is kind of what you're doing when you're verifying this project information. Who'd you contract with? Who owns the project? Is there a payment bond? You're making phone calls, you're looking online. You can find a lot of this information online. You can look at the general contractor's website. They'll list the projects they're working on. We still make a ton of phone calls when trying to find this information as well, though. Looking on the Secretary of State can kind of get you through the mire of which corporate entity is which. I'll recommend, if you haven't used SOS Direct, it's a paid service with our Texas Secretary of State that provides just robust information about any entity. Like somebody's told you that so-and-so entity, Southwestern Development is the LLC, is the owner of this job. You can look up Southwestern LLC on the Texas Secretary of State, and it'll tell you exactly which addresses you need to put onto your notice letter. That's why, so take a look at Texas SOS Direct, and I recommend that you use that service if you're going to try to send these notices in-house. Here's the one thing that they won't tell you that I want to tell you right now. If you only rely on Central Appraisal District records to verify ownership of property, you can be wrong for almost a year. They could have sold this property almost a year ago and you wouldn't know. If you send the notice to the wrong owner based on Central's CAD records, Central Appraisal District records that just hadn't been updated, That the burden's on you. When I'm talking, the reason why I'm beating this dead horse with the project information and who owns the property and that type of thing is because if your notice letters don't get to the right people, they're not effective. If they don't get to the right parties, they're not effective. And it's on you to get it to the right parties. There's nothing in Texas law that says, oh, well, you get a pass because the CAD said that it was owned, but they really sold it 8 months ago. You don't get a pass. You just lost your claim. So that's why I'm saying this. So do not rely. CAD records are a good place to start, but they can be out of date by up to a year because think about it. A Central Appraisal District records, the whole purpose of that record is who's going to pay the taxes this year. So they generally don't get updated until it's about tax time, and then they get updated. So let's see. The only way to really verify ownership of a property is to pull the deed. All counties in Texas, I think all counties in Texas now have their deed records online. You can look up deed records online. The search engines are not as user friendly as we would like. It's not like Google. They don't have AI. But you can, if you play with it, usually find the deed, and that's what you're looking for to actually, because the ownership of property is all a matter of deed. Whose name is on the deed? Doesn't matter who the general contractor told you the owner is. If they didn't tell you the person that the entity that's on the deed, they told you the wrong person. They told you the wrong entity. So here's the other thing I really want you guys to know, that because if you miss a deadline, you miss a deadline. There's no do-over. Any of these types of claims, any of these types of projects, if you miss a deadline, you're just out of luck. There's tons of cases, Texas case law, where, you know, the sub tried to mail the letter, but maybe the postage was 25 cents short, and so the letter came back. That's your problem. You have no claim. If you miss a deadline, you miss a deadline. There's some wiggle room in maybe some of the technical requirements for some of these notice letters. Maybe you got somebody's name slightly wrong or those types of things. But if the letter does not go out on time, you are just toast. You do not have a claim. So let's talk about what are those deadlines. Let's talk, we're going to go over a summary of what these deadlines are. So this is our private projects, like most projects, right? It's owned by private entities. These are our deadlines. There's really two deadlines. If you happen to be a general contractor, so that means that you are, or if you are a general contractor, so you're contracted directly with the owner on any job, you only have one step. You got to file a mechanics lien by the 15th day of the 4th month after the last month that you did work on that job. One deadline if you're a general contractor. But for most of us who are not a general contractor, if you're a subcontractor or supplier, you have two deadlines. You've got to send a notice letter by the 15th day of the 3rd month after each month that you do work that you have not been paid for. And so this is just kind of a chart to tell you what that looks like in real life, right? You did work that you weren't paid for in January. That letter's got to go out in April, right? So January, February, March, April 15th, you've got to get that letter out. If that 15th falls on a weekend, send the letter before. For the notice letters, you may have to send several. If you keep doing work and you're not being paid, and you do work in January, you haven't been paid, so you send a notice. You continue to do work in February, haven't been paid, you may have to send several notice letters because notice it's after each month. But the mechanics lien deadline, you should only ever have to file one mechanics lien. That 15th day of the 4th month deadline is after the last month you perform work on the job. So you may have to send several letters before you then file your lien. It's kind of how the law is designed in Texas. So those are your deadlines. So there's two deadlines for anybody that's not the general contractor. 15th day of the 3rd month for your notice, and then 15th day of the 4th month after the last month you do your work for your mechanics lien. Now here's our deadlines. If you're state or local government jobs, this is your deadlines. Now note, these are much faster. there's still a second month notice required for state and local government jobs. In Texas, for private projects, we got rid of that second month notice 4 or 5 years ago at this point. But for state and local government jobs, you've still got what I call a preliminary notice, but you've got this notice letter that has to go out on the 15th day of the second month. So here's kind of that chart again for you. If you're doing work in January, February, March, you got to get that notice out to the general contractor. If that notice doesn't go out by March 15th to the general contractor, you just lost your claim. That deadline comes up fast. That's almost just 60 days. How many jobs on the government jobs are you getting paid in 60 days? But if you don't send the notice, you lose your claim. You lose your payment bond claim. It's just that simple. So federal projects, I told you, these are so much easier than these other types of jobs. Federal projects are so much easier. All you've got to do is send a notice within 90 days after the last day you do work for a federal job. So if you're doing federal work, more power to you. So then, we don't really have a lot of time today to talk about how to perfect these claims, but one of the things you can do is SunRay, one of the reasons why SunRay does valuable work is these notice letters it's no joke. They have to say very specific things. They have to be sent in a very tight timeline. If you don't want to have to become an expert yourself, SunRay can help you with getting those notice letters out. But the one thing for private projects, there's a statutory form for that third month notice letter that's got to go out, right? The notice letter's got to go to everyone above you in that construction chain. And the statute actually says word for word, hey, this is what your notice needs to look like. So these two slides that we're about to look at, that's just a copy and paste from the statute. This warning at the top, your letter's got to say that word for word. You got to have the date. You got to have the project description and address. You got to have the claimant's name. All of these line items, you just basically have to fill in the blanks after these things, and then you have your claim letter. That is it. It is a statutory form. The thing that they will not tell you that I'm going to tell you right now is if you're using something that looks sort of like this, a notice letter that you've used for the last 10 years, and your attorney 10 years ago gave you a form that you've been using, it's no longer valid. I don't care if your letter says a lot of the same stuff. It kind of gets close. When the Texas legislature provides us a word-for-word form, you know what they want us to do? Use it. Do you know what this law says? If you do not use the statutory form of letter, Texas law says it may not be valid. That if it does not substantially comply with the statutory form of notice, you may not have a good claim. So if you are using an old form, stop today. If you Google chapter 20 or you Google chapter 53 statutory notice, it'll probably come up. These two slides are an exact copy and paste of what that form needs to look like. So use the form is my advice. Now, the second month notice, if you still want to send a second month notice on a private job, you can. You don't have to. If you want to, you just think it'll spur payment and you want to send your notice early, you can. If you want to send a second month notice, my advice is just to use the same form you would use for a third month notice. You can always send notices early. You can never send them late. Oh, so then your next step in the private project, you've got to get that mechanics lien on file. There is no statutory form for a mechanics lien. The law just tells you the stuff that's got to be in there. It tells you this kind of listing of the information that's got to be in your mechanics lien, but there is no statutory form for it. So you'll have to just look at the requirements and try to meet them. And here's what an affidavit, the statute lists out all the things that kind of got to be in there. And the most important part and the hardest part, I should say, not the most important part, the hardest part is you've got to have that legal description for the property in there. So when I was talking to you all about trying to find that the deed for the property, that's how you're going to get that legal description. Can you get a partial legal description from the Central Appraisal District records? Yeah, you could probably get a lot and block number. Is that actually a legal description? No. Is it most likely going to be okay? Most likely going to be enough? If the CAD record's right, probably. But still, gold standard, get that deed, get the actual legal description from the deed by looking at the real property records online. Then after you send your mechanics lien, after you've filed your mechanics liens are not something you just mail out. They've got to be recorded in the real property records. So we talked about the real property records. You can search them online these days. That's where you'll find deeds. That's exactly where you'll find mechanics liens. That's where mechanics liens get recorded. You have to file your mechanics lien with the real property records for whichever county where your project is. And you have to pay a fee to get it recorded. And when it's recorded, you can look up, you'll use those real property record search. You'd be able to search your company's name and your mechanics lien will pop up because now it is recorded in the real property records. Once your mechanics lien has been recorded in the real property records, you have to send notice to everybody in the construction chain that you recorded that lien within 5 days of the date you recorded it. Your lien will not be valid if you fail to send that notice, because if they're not going to automatically know that something got recorded in the real property records. The real property clerks just receive those documents. They do their indexing of the documents and they're done. They don't send anybody notice that anything got filed with them. That's on you. You have to send that notice to everybody in the construction chain. Let's talk about bond claims on a private project. We talked about that a private project can be bonded. They don't have to be bonded. If a private project happens to be bonded, the owner has required the general contractor to bond the job, then all you have to do is when you send that 3rd month notice that we talked about, that statutory form of notice, send that same form of notice letter, but for the addresses you're sending it to, add the surety so that the surety gets a copy of that letter. That is your bond claim. For a private project, you're sending the surety a copy of your notice. For these private projects that are bonded, you also want to go ahead and just file that mechanics lien as well. You're going to file that mechanics lien also. And then you would send a copy of the mechanics lien to the surety as well as everyone else as well.
I do have a question that just came through, Rebecca, if you don't mind. And I think you just kind of answered it. It says, do you recommend doing a separate 3rd month fund trapping notice and a 3rd month bond notice if the project is commercial and private?
If it's commercial and private, no, you just send the 3rd month notice, but add the surety to your letter.
So the 3rd month fund trapping altogether just with the bond company.
When you send these letters, for example, when my office sends these 3rd month notice letters, the statutory form fund trapping notice letter, I call it a fund trapping notice letter. It's a statutory form 3rd month letter under Chapter 53. When we send those out, we often have 6 or 7 addresses on there, maybe more, depending on where you sit in that construction chain. So for that, when you're adding your addresses to your letter, you're going to just send it to the surety as well as everybody else you'd normally send it to. That is your bond claim. Do you want to do it by separate letter? You don't have to. If you want to send a separate letter, go for it. But the surety needs to be included on a 3rd month notice letter. That for a private project is ideally how you do it. For private projects where there is a subcontractor bond, remember we talked about that the general contractor by contract only can require a subcontractor to bond a job. If you are a 2nd tier sub and you realize that the 1st tier sub ahead of you that you've contracted with was required to pay to provide a payment bond, it is the wild west with those payment bonds. They're not governed by a statute. They can say anything in the world, and you need to comply with whatever it says. So you have to get a copy of the bond and do what it says. There's no, statutory form for it because it's not a product of any sort of law, right? It's a product of a contract. So, but now most of the time, if a subcontractor is required to bond a job, these sureties are not rocket scientists. They're not going to have, they normally will just try to use the same form that they would use for a general contractor bond, but it's just the subcontractor is the one purchasing it and being the principal on it. So most of the time, if you then just add the subcontractor surety bond, the surety on the subcontractor bond to your 3rd month notice letter as well, you're most likely going to be fine. That's normally how we handle that situation. Now, if we read the subcontractor bond and it has some ridiculous kind of crazy requirements, we'll comply with those. But for the most part, they usually just use the same form, and you can just copy the sureties for the subcontractor bond on your notice, and you're good to go. Deadline for filing suit to foreclose. Once you have filed a mechanics lien, you cannot let it sit out there. If you let it sit more than a year, you just lost the mechanics lien. You have to file suit to foreclose it within 1 year of the date you file that lien. And we're talking about the file date. right? The date that it went into and was recorded in the real property records. So just do not let that, you always think, oh, 1 year, yeah, for sure I'll meet that. 1 year can go by quick, especially if you're in negotiations with the general contractor or whoever you contracted with about some issues. Do not let that 1 year period pass. So on a state or local government job, there's really those 2 steps we talked about, the 2nd month notice and the 3rd month. The 2nd month preliminary notice, and then that 3rd month, which is your actual formal bond claim, is what goes out on that 3rd month. So let's see. This is just an example of what we use as a preliminary notice, but there is no statutory form for a preliminary notice on one of these state or local government jobs. It just basically is giving that general contractor, because you're not, for this preliminary notice is only required if you do not have a contract directly with the general contractor. So if you're a 2nd tier sub or below, if you're 1st tier sub, you don't have to do this step because you've contracted directly with the general contractor. They already know they haven't paid you, right? That's the way the law thinks about it. But if you do not contract directly with the general contractor, you're a 2nd tier sub or a 2nd tier supplier, whatever it is you're doing, then you have to send this letter. And it's just notice to that general contractor that you're out there and you haven't been paid. It's that simple. And so we just do it in a letter that looks like that. That deadline, let's see. Then your next step is that the actual bond claim. This is the part that you do have to follow some strict requirements about what the claim says, or you won't have a valid bond claim. You have to provide a sworn statement of account. So that means you're going to have to sign an affidavit before a notary, swear to it in front of a notary for it to be valid, as far as the amounts due, and there's some other things. So and you've got to provide some additional basic information about the project, who you contracted with, etc. And again here, your bond claim, if your bond claim is not paid within 1 year of the date you first made the bond claim, so the first date that you sent any sort of notice to the surety, 1 year from that is all you have to file suit. And you have to file suit against the surety and the principal on the payment bond is what you do on these bond claims. But don't let that 1 year deadline pass. So Miller Act, that one notice 90 days after your last date you did work on that job or did any furnished any materials on that job, that's your only notice there. So that was basically what I planned on covering today. So I really appreciate y'all's time today. If y'all have other questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, so another question that came through, it says, typically our material suppliers will send lien notices after 45 days of the month at the end of the billing. Our payment applications are submitted on the 20th. Should we send first notice 45 days after billing?
These notice letters, all of these deadlines that we're talking about are going to run from, it doesn't run from the billing date. It runs from the date you did the work. So if you did the work, you did work in January, but you're not going to bill it until sometime in February, you're still working from January. So what I'm saying is, if you did work in January, it's a private project, and you've got to get that 3rd month notice out January, February, March, April 15th. That's when it goes out. If you want to send it early, sounds like your supplier might be sending them, if they're doing it 45 days after when the materials are delivered. If they're sending out a notice within 45 days of the date that you purchased the materials or they were delivered to your job site, they're sending it out early. And that's fine. They can do that. And you can too. So if your question is, can I? Yeah, absolutely. Are you required to? No. You're going to need to send that notice by the 15th day of the 3rd month. So January, you did the work. You may not have sent your invoice or your pay app, but you did the work. That's when you're working from January, February, March, April 15th when that letter's going out. You with me?
Wonderful. Thank you. Another question that came through, and it's kind of related to the last one, so we'll go with that one. It's I'm a supplier. What is considered the first day on the job? Is it when I supply the material, or when the materials are furnished, or when they are incorporated?
When they're furnished, 100% when they're furnished. Do not, and even if your materials never get incorporated to that project, you can still lien it. You can still send your notice.
Okay, and then another question that came through, it says, why in Texas are bonds not required like they are to be recorded in Florida by the GC?
Not required to be recorded?
Yes. Why? Yes, essentially they're asking why the bond is not being required to be recorded in the county.
Actually, if you bond a private project, are they supposed to record a copy of the bond in the real property records? They are. Does it happen most of the time?
Got it.
I don't know why. And there's no enforcement mechanism.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Nobody's enforcing it.
The next couple of questions that I see here are about retainage. It says, I'm confused about retainage notices. Should they be sent at the beginning of a project or at the end? I understand that retainage notices should be sent 30 days from completion of the work. Is that the completion of my work as a sub or the GC?
Okay, here's the thing. Retainage and reserve funds is such a complicated thing in Texas. I cannot answer this question. It would take us another 30 minutes. The reason why you didn't see any coverage of retainage in this seminar is because we don't have time. So I would propose that you send me that by email and let me actually provide you some real information, because it's too complicated for me to answer right now in any real way.
Okay, wonderful. And then this one also pertains to retainage, but I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one. If I'm a supplier, does retainage notice go out when you furnish the materials or when it's incorporated?
It's still going to be furnishing.
Okay, wonderful. I do think that is all the questions that have come through.
Now let me kind of backtrack, because yes, everything in Texas law works from the date you furnish stuff at this point, right? The only exception to that, specially fabricated materials, which is another real complicated, nuanced issue that we don't have time to cover. But I think if the question is, does your retainage notice go out up front? No, but it's complicated. So I would encourage you to email me, because it's complicated.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. If anyone does think of another question that wasn't addressed, please feel free to reach out and we'll be sure to answer those questions. All right, can you go to the next slide for us? Pardon me. All right, here are some of SunRay's resources to help you guys stay organized, know your deadlines, and secure your lien rights. So go ahead and scan that QR code to access these incredible site resources. There are project information sheets on there. There's rules by each state. Remember, each state has its own unique lien laws, deadlines, bond claim rules, all of that kind of good stuff. So please make sure that you're looking on the appropriate state that your project is actually taking place in to get those rules and what's required of you. And then the next slide, please. All right, if you don't mind, give us a quick minute of your time. Give us a review on Google. We really do appreciate any feedback you're able to provide to us. It helps us better the material that we're getting out there to you. So I'd really appreciate it if you don't mind taking a second to give us that review. And with that, that is all we have for you guys today. Thank you again to everybody who was able to attend. We hope to see you guys at our next webinar. Rebecca, I really can't say thank you enough. You really are incredible. I hope you all have a beautiful and wonderful sunny day. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.